In your ministry, you've chosen to speak on two issues nearly every year, against racism during MLK, and then around the time of Roe v. Wade on abortion each year. Why those two issues, and would you encourage other pastors to speak out against other injustices on standalone sermons regularly like that?
Let me see if I can move from the broad to the specific. I certainly do not have everything worked out in my own mind about how particularly political a pastor can be. As soon as I try to say something to guard against it, somebody comes back with everything's political, which is kind of true, especially today, it feels like. Nevertheless, this is what I do say. I think pastors should try to maintain a freedom for prophetic announcements of God's word and perspective against Democrats, against Republicans, against independents, to cross every line for Jesus' sake, to make everybody mad, sometimes, because of this radical book. So that you always sense, you never walk away saying, I got a good Republican for a pastor. I got a good Democrat for a pastor. If you better say, my pastor's kingship, citizenship is in heaven. Right. And he comes Sunday after Sunday with a perspective that seems to cross all these lines. Right. So that's my big general feel, that it's the more partisan you become, and sometimes you can't help it because certain issues sound partisan, but the more partisan you become, I would say, the more your credibility as an independent prophetic prophet on behalf of God, not party, is compromised. Right. I see problems with that, and yet I think that's in general the way we should lead our lives. Now, with regard to how often and which issues, you're right. We do pro-life on the anniversary or near the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and we do racial justice on the MLK weekend, and they tend to move around together. And I joke with the people that I want to sound Democratic, like a Democrat on one Sunday and a Republican on the next, in order to make everybody upset. Why those two? It's partly weight and partly personal history. And we all live our history. The weight, I mean, is 1.5 million babies slaughtered a year. Can't get any worse. I just rank it at the top. It's the worst sin of America. If you combine with it the idolatry that goes with it. Me, not that embryo. Me. It's just breathtaking. I frankly think that in the generations to come, if the Lord doesn't come back, I think abortion will be overcome, become illegal, and in maybe 200-300 years, people will look back and say, I cannot believe how little John Piper did. Given what he knows, I can't believe how little he did. I lose sleep over this. I'm listening to Martin Luther King speeches right now because I got to speak at the MLK anniversary in a month. I'm listening to all these speeches. You can get 30 free speeches at Amazon Prime Music. And I'm listening to them. And Martin Luther King was a prophetic voice on a lot of issues. Vietnam, segregation, economic injustice, the poor everywhere in the world. I mean, I just listened to a message of his at Riverside Church in New York. And I think he mentioned about 12 things. 12 major injustices of the world. And he said, I'm sure he said it as an aside, he said, we ought to always be marching. And I just kind of wilted. I thought, yeah, that feels right, because don't you care? Don't you care about the poverty in Yemen? Don't you care about the plague in Yemen right now? The cholera? And how we can't do anything about it because the government won't let the aid workers in and care about that? Why don't you go to the streets?
Right.
And then 12 others. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I went up to my study and I wrote down 15 issues that I know about today that are worth a march. So, the only way I survive, my conscience survives, is to believe that if I pick a few and try to be more focused and concentrated in calling to action, and then I stay with the gospel in a radical way, that I do believe the gospel will produce a kind of people who will commit fewer of those atrocities and will be better in fighting the ones that exist. Whether I succeeded in my ministry at that, God will judge, but that's theoretically, that's the way I live with pain. So, in answer to your question, 2 or 3 focused messages a year or more say to the people, those sorts of things really matter. We don't stick our head in the sand as Christians. This gospel must bear fruit publicly and relationally and communally, not just in our little private morality. It says that. And then you give models to them how to talk about, how to think about racism and how to think about pro-life and so on. And then hopefully in all these other 40, 50 messages that you do, you haven't left aside entirely your community issues, your church issues, your national issues. That you're always, whatever God is burdening you with, that's on people's hearts right now, that's going to get some kind of allusion, some kind of application, so that people sense, oh, it's not just in January. He carries a burden for this and this and this. And I suppose what God gives you, I mean, for some people I could name right now, sex trafficking. That wasn't even on my horizon 20 years ago. And now it's very prominent in people. And I can imagine some pastors, they're going to go after this head on until something changes about it. And you can almost become known as the pastor who carries that burden. And I think that's okay, provided the rest of your preaching isn't distorted by it. It's just, you're aware that that's his special burden.
How do you guard those special burdens becoming sort of the hobby horse, that sort of thing where it does begin to distort and everyone else thinks, this is the church that always goes after that?
Yep. I'll tell you how it's happened. People will tell you, why are you harping on that? For me, I began from 1983, say, to the end of the decade, people began to say to me, I think you're making home ministries feel second class because you're always talking about frontier missions. And I think they were right. So I had to work really hard to say, I really believe in reaching unreached peoples. I really do. They're lost. They have no chance. And I'm glad you're down there counseling at the pro-life. I'm glad you're working for homeless people in Minneapolis. I'm glad you care about economic issues. I'm glad. And I wrote a chapter in a collection, and I preached a sermon on the relationship between domestic ministries and frontier missions to try to get off my horse or to somehow make it more balanced. That's one. And the second is I just see it myself. I ask the Lord, God, protect me. And I find by my wider reading, I haven't said a word about this, and this. And I've said this 5 times in the last month. And I spot myself, these big empty holes here. These issues have gone away. This issue is just recurrent all the time. That's not, I can feel it myself. It's become a hobby horse.
Well, the question I was thinking of is you've given us some really good feedback. The place of feedback for preachers and pastors. How does a pastor make sure that they get good feedback and they're receiving it from somebody that's going to be helpful to them? How does that happen?
That last phrase is key.
That is key. Yeah, you can't make sure that happens, or only happens. You married, that's one way.
Yep. Wife will give you feedback.
Give her permission.
Yep.
Give her permission. She's your best. She's the only person that'll tell you you've said the word absolutely too much. I mean, my wife is just checking my vocabulary regularly. She said, "Do you realize how often you say the word absolutely? Do you realize how?" No. Okay, that one goes aside, and here comes another one taking its place, and she has to chip in and tell me that one. So, wives are important. Your elders, ask them. Ask them at all your elder meetings. Any feedback on the preaching. Talk to me, guys, because you want to fold them in and have them, and then read your mail. And so those three things, I think, for me anyway, have proved to be enough. When I say elders, I was together with the staff. Elders only monthly for a long time, or every 3 weeks at the end. My elders, my staff, every week. And so those 7 guys, I said, come on. And they didn't hesitate to say, I think you made so-and-so feel pretty bad with the way you said that, or they'll tell you right off that something went haywire in that sermon. Or they'll say nice things. My guys are pretty gentle. They were with me, but they weren't afraid.
Yeah. But you got to open yourself up for the feedback.
Oh,
You got to welcome.
Precisely. That's so good. I'm
welcome
kind of taking that for granted. You got to communicate. I want this. I'm open to this. You don't lose your job, right? You don't become a second-class staff member because you're the one who regularly calls me out.
Dan Holtz told me I don't smile enough, and I said, yes, that's what I need. I need that type of feedback, to both at the exegetical level as well as the, what do I look like up there to help our people?
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We all, this is another whole lesson we don't have time for, but Spurgeon, it's usually not included in his lectures to his preaching, lectures on preaching, but there's a chapter in the original version on little things that people do that are like a fly in the ointment. Mm-hmm. He said, you got this wonderful smelling sermon of aroma, and there's this fly in it because the guy keeps rubbing his nose or scratching himself or doing some weird thing. I had a pastor one time, every time he looked down, he'd touch this little bald spot in his head right here. And it's kind of the way he covered his, I need my notes right now. And we would just mock it, like this. I see, he needs somebody to tell him, can you just not touch your forehead next time you look? Like little teeny meaningless things. Like, okay, we can smile more. Thanks, guys. This has been good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor John.
Thank you.